Hello, everybody. I'm Patricia James. I'm a cross-cultural expert and a traditionally trained and initiated pipe carrier in the Cheyenne tradition. I'm a friend of Jeff's, and it's my pleasure today to introduce him and to spend some time with him today, hoping that you all get a nice glimpse of the depth of integrative work that Jeff does. So Jeff Leifer is an impact advisor and psychospiritual coach. He's the founder of Circadian, a cross-sector experience lab that's focused on integration and consciousness. And for the past 2 decades, Jeff has worked with Native communities in the Amazon rainforest to preserve traditional ecological knowledge and practices. Jeff also co-founded the Psychedelic Research Education and Policy Grants Committee at Thresholds Foundation and currently serves on the board of directors for the Ketamine Research Foundation, which is focused on psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which will be the area we'll be covering today. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah. So what might be the most effective use of our time today? And, to discuss, because it's quite a broad topic, integration, and a very important one.
Indeed. Thanks. I think that given the limitation on time, there's so much good content and information out there around specific practices and the details of any one given integrative modality that I thought it might be best use of time to offer a broader framework and some broad context about how either an individual or a therapist or guide might help shape a process of integration. So it would be more about this this higher level of what do we mean by integration and its usefulness, because it's becoming such a common term and we can get lost in the semantics, and it's becoming sort of a shortcut or a heuristic. And what I really would like to sort of ground the conversation with is this idea that it's a process, not just a practice, and that we're orienting towards essential nature, where we have these outward experiences and inward experiences. And really the process is in service to creating a resonance between the inward and the outward experience, a resonance that becomes really full expression. And the idea that, the word integration means to render something whole. And so in this case, we're talking about rendering ourselves or those that we are supporting to be fully expressed and to be whole. So I would love to talk a little bit about what I mean by integration and then we can get into some conversation.
So what specific aspects of the psychoactive experience do you want to draw from today?
Yeah,
and
thanks.
How are we going to be addressing this broad topic of integration?
Yeah, that's important. What I'd like to do, given again the time constraints, is sort of limit the conversation to drawing from experience of traditional ecological knowledge, specifically from the Amazon rainforest, where I've spent a lot of time, both as a board member on Amazon Watch for many years, but also just going back and forth for more than a decade, working with Native peoples and indigenous traditions, the vehicalistas, the guides and the doctors from the rainforest. So that's one piece where the work is legal and where groups take pilgrimages to do this deep work with many master plants, up to 50 or 70 different master plants, not all of which are psychoactive. And then the other part of experience to draw on today would be through the legal modality of ketamine, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, which is a very exciting aspect of integrative work. And I want to give props to the Ketamine Research Foundation for organizing this online Infinite Playa K-Dome program today. So those, we also can refer somewhat to legal research, clinical studies that are being done with MDMA and psilocybin. So keeping it in that construct, I think, will be most efficient for today.
These are all quite emerging concepts in the field and very new, especially in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So I'll be curious, what might be the context that you set, and then choose to begin to work with somebody, drawing on these different principles.
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, it's great that we're friends, because these are conversations we're always having and wanting to impart. And I can't wait for the next time when I get to interview you, so we can share all the juicy conversation we've been having. Yeah, in terms of context and framing, I guess I would start by saying I'm not particularly interested in evangelizing or talking to a specific practice or telling people what they should do for a given situation necessarily. If I'm in a coaching, guiding role around integration, because sometimes therapists and psychiatrists will refer someone who's done some deep work, and I'll work on an integration coaching practicum with them. But I'm more interested in talking today about the lens that's helps to ground the practice and some of the tools that create the cornerstone of the container, so that we can shape our own integrative process, so that we can identify our own personal integrating principles, and so that we can really have a process of deepening our understanding of our own interior architecture, deepening the acceptance of where we are before we begin to invite the kind of growth and transformation that we are asking to take us to where we want to go.
So you mentioned a really important concept about relationships. So can you say more about that, or describe the lens you begin to use and look through when you're working with relationships?
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. So yeah, I've been really interested in a practicum that I've developed called Nature of Relationship. And yeah, it's really about relational learning, relational living. Nature being a double entendre there, because the elements are really our allies. And this, again, drawing from the indigenous ways. There are very beautiful yet contemporary ways to work with local plants, herbs, and elements of nature, and traditional approaches, without having cultural appropriation and without holding too precious some of these indigenous ways, but really contemporary applications for our Western Northern ways here. And with the blessing and reciprocity with the indigenous, standing in solidarity with the indigenous, in gratitude for these ancient healing modalities and how they might help us in the northern Western complex society. So yeah, I'll just mention a couple of key points around your question around relationship, nature of relationship. One is, I'd like to say, direct experience. So, we are co-arising with nature, and if I go to work with a peak experience or a challenging experience, a deep shadow work process, and I do that at a later date, it's really important for me to realize that my remembered self is reliably inaccurate, if you will, compared to the direct experience that I might be having when I am recalling a dream, or sitting in counsel, or working with embodied practice to access these deeper states of knowing, to access the medicine and the intelligence from true nature. And the understanding also in terms of relationship that people and planet are in deep relationship. In my enterprise, Patricia, that you mentioned in the introduction, Circadian, we have this kind of mission, if you will, that personal well-being and planetary health are actually inseparable. And so we can talk about that a little bit later, but people and planet are like nested systems. My body, my psychospiritual self, my tribe and community, my relationship to faith and lineage, my part as a human earthling on this planet, my relationship with the cosmos, etc. Nested systems that inform each other and are supple and dynamic. And so we can access intelligence, and we can also, in reciprocity, offer our experience and our humility and our learnings back to the collective. So we can talk more about that. That's the relationship piece.
Would you speak to the regenerative piece, please?
Yes. So, again, we just spoke of the regenerative principles are often looked at only at the level of systems thinking and systems design, which I care deeply about, and I think are fundamental for how we approach healing and transformation in this complex time, is acknowledging the complexity of the challenges that face us, like climate, inequality, and the destruction, of our planet and ecosystem endangerment. So regenerative principles that are salient in biomimicry, in systems design and thinking, in permaculture, in all these beautiful, science-based, biologically based ecosystems also can apply to personal well-being, health, and transformation. So an example would be the recognition that there's so much agency in self-healing, rather than giving up my power to ideologies or teachers, or even tools like medicines, which are really brilliant, but only when they're in the right context and within the right trajectory of integration. Another would be looking and understanding that processes and capacities are adaptive. They're transformative. We see that in the natural world. How can we understand the relationship between human systems and natural systems? They are not different. Emergent properties, cultivating conditions on the ground, as Buckminster Fuller once said, cultivating conditions on the ground for emergence. In our integrative processes, either as a guide or a therapist for our client, patient that we're supporting, or for ourselves, for our own individual work, emergence is such a core piece of how I like to hold the integrative process. And it goes back to the relationship piece, and it also speaks to the regenerative piece. What conditions have to be created for, rather than my initiative and my linear, strategic, directed approach to integration, how can I create conditions for an integrative process to emerge and integrate me, not just me, integrate it. And I guess the final point I'd make about regenerative principles would be around integrity. And of course, it has the same root as integration, and that's for a reason. In systems thinking, there's integrity at every scale, whether it's this scale or that system that I spoke of earlier on the top of the nested systems. And if we have integrity at one scale, then we will have integrity at all scales. And if we have distortion at the scale where I'm not able to really accept and see the truth of where I am, then as I scale up and invite transformation, I will scale that distortion. So we need integrity at all scales. So just to summarize, like at the personal level, we might ask in our integrative process some core grounding questions to help shape, this process. What are my core values? What are my innate gifts? What is my soul's path? Where do I want to build my temple, if you will, not literally? What am I willing to commit to? And at the collective level, I might say, like, what worldview am I participating in? And am I creating? What am I stewarding? What is my part in the evolution of consciousness? And so, so those are just a little bit about the high level context for nature of relationship and regenerative principles being applied to the integration of psychospiritual experience.
Well, speaking about the integrative process, would you describe some of the key cornerstones that you use? I know you've, in our conversations, have talked about inspiration, invitation, and initiation, and maybe explain those a little, please.
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, it's kind of helpful just to help my mind grok this very dimensional, sometimes ethereal process. How to really ground it in kind of a useful personal system and practice. So yeah, inspiration, invitation, initiation. Kind of a fun little way to break some pieces down. And I would say inspiration is kind of synonymous with intentionality. When we start, we can invite an attunement to the flows of life, if you will. And I know that setting this context can sound a little bit lofty and vague for those that really want to know, well, what should I do? What about journaling? And what about getting into nature? And what are my embodied practices? But we're still today talking at a high level about thoughtfully creating the containers and the North Star orientation for the effectiveness of the practices that we will later bring in. So attuning to the flows of life. Attuning myself can create a shift of my own reality. That's so essential for attaining those deeper states of resonance. What are the elements telling me? There's so many elements. How can I, listen? How do I listen? What do I need? What is one question for me to work with today to set in motion this opening, rather than it coming from my mental frontal cortex? It's more of an allowing, so that guidance may come, so that I may surrender to guidance, so that I may access a higher intelligence that I call a headlessness, which is a true knowing. And if I'm not getting a big yes there, I wait. I wait until the music dances me onto the floor. And so, what is the role of the linear in this process that I consider to be quite nonlinear? Because there is a deep role for that. Just like in the Buddhist practice, linearity has a place. Structure and accountability has a purpose to create the structures and processes for us to harness the wisdom that will emerge, that will be integrated into our fully expressed whole self. So attuning to life systems around us actually sustains those systems. We're actually a part of contributing to sustaining life systems by attuning to and with them. We begin to see the beauty of the invisible, which is a core tenet of systems thinking. And yet we see the value of it in our own personal growth process. We start to suspend ideas and thoughts and invite the not knowing, and realize it's already been happening. When I'm in the forest walking, I can sometimes recognize the forest is actually breathing me rather than I'm breathing in the forest only. There's that reciprocity and relationship piece. So that's a bit on inspiration and intention. I appreciate letting me set this up, Patricia, before we go deep into conversation, because it does help. Since I'm speaking on context, it's good to set up context. So let me get through the other two then. Invitation, I would say, yeah, we were just starting to segue into that piece. These aren't hard boundaries. This is a flow, a continuum, if you will. But just using those three demarcations to help us simplify our process. Invitation, like our mind is full of automatic processes, right? We're automatically doing things. That's why in much Buddhist practice, we begin to recognize our lungs the heart process, the involuntary processes that are already happening. They're automatic.
Mhm.
And to bring mindfulness and attentiveness to that can be so helpful. And we begin to see the difference between intention and attention. And we can talk a little bit about that later when we talk about embodied practices, where open attention is a beautiful state of accessing a greater intelligence and support for our integrative process. So still an invitation, we are inside our own architecture, those automatic mind processes. How well do we know our own architecture? How deeply have we sunk into acceptance of where we are, surrendering to that guidance that we spoke of? Again, looking to systems, analog, a metaphor. In systems, when we look in permaculture and biomimicry, we look for pattern recognition. It's all over nature. And pattern recognition at the level of personal integrative work can support expansion, can support healing, just as it does in those other systems. We begin to increase trust in the intelligence of this moment, rather than leaving the moment and sort of going to a constructed idea of where we'd like to be, or a remembered story of where we were. This moment has the most useful and healing medicine for us, but how to allow it rather than try to effort and initiate it. And that kind of brings us into the out of invitation stage, if you will, just for simplicity, into this initiatory initiation part of a process. How to bring the expanded worldview that we might have experienced in a peak experience, or in a challenging transition, or in a deep shadow process that we've gone through, possibly with psychoactive medicines and support, like with ketamine assisted psychotherapy, or with maybe a plant diet in the Amazon rainforest. How to bring this new worldview, the new capacity for cognition, the new levels of agency, the new expanded capacities for self-healing and for awareness. There is an initiatory process that helps to anchor those experiences, the topography, the shape, the tonal palette of those, that new information and intelligence. We don't have to grasp for it. We don't have to worry that we're not going to remember it. When we create the proper container, invitation and intentionality, we will set with our linear intention a process for a nonlinear initiation to take place. And so we let go of what we think we need in our idea. We acknowledge where we are. We get to deep acceptance of what a transformational relationship looks like. And later, if we talk about plant diets, we can talk about communion and courtship with plant allies as the indigenous hold them. And we learn that we can't trick our true nature. There is no shortcut around that, which are sometimes our coping mechanisms of the mental mind are tempted to go there. We start to let go and to relax into the allowing. We work with that direct experience in the initiatory process, and we understand what co-arising with nature means. And finally, I guess I would say we experience a humility in the face of something that we may not have recognized before. Later, when we talk about one modality, which is working with dreams, projective dream work, we start to see that there are multiple levels of valid meaning to this waking dream that I'm living, and to the other realms of dreaming that I'm experiencing in connection with my ancestors, with my plant allies, with my community, and with the collective unconscious. There's a great humility and learning with the awe of the larger thing than my idea of self. And we posture that recognition in a large design, larger really than my mental mind actually can grok or make sense of in an analytic or calculating way, and we start to open to these broader capacities. So that's just a little bit about intention and inspiration, invitation, and initiation. Thanks for letting me get through that.
No, I think it's very important and rich. So let's get some practicality here. Can you give me some examples, or give us all some examples of processes that you take people through? You mentioned dream work. I'm sure there's probably others.
Definitely. So yeah, let's touch on a few things. One, let me mention a couple of less common things that I work with, that if people want to follow up with, they could reach out, since we won't have time to get too detailed about how to do it. But yeah, one is this idea of projective dream work, which Jung touched on to some extent in the part of the work he did that I thought really worked. And so dreams are about collective imagination, about holding multiple possible futures, about multiple valid levels of the dream, and about this information, this guidance that we're surrendering to, about the fact that we are ready for it. It's not coming before we're ready. And also the fact that what we're harnessing, what's emerging for us to integrate, is new. Sometimes we go in our mind and we think, oh yeah, I've seen that, I know that one. But in these journeys, and in this psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and in the indigenous traditions in the rainforest, there's this deep understanding, in the way I hold it, that the information and the intelligence coming through is new. I'm ready for it. And there's multiple levels of resonance. There could be a gender lens, there could be an intergenerational lens, there could be a lens about my relationship with my body, with my breath, with my my livelihood, my right livelihood. So the dream work can be a fascinating way to work with metaphor and to learn how to hold paradox. My mind wants to square, is it this or is it that? Does it mean this? Does my healing work that needs to be integrated, is it about this or is it about that? But in fact, what we find is there's deep truth in the medicine of paradox, and dream work helps us to develop a facility and a language to work in that way. Another specific practice, thanks Patricia for pushing me to ground it always, is we hold these 30-day northern dietas, plant diets, not with psychedelic allies like in the jungle, but with local herbs like adaptogens, and local plants like bay laurel and fennel and rose and calendula and lemon balm and tarragon, and all these beautiful allies from our apothecary, from our local gardens, before we invite people to the Amazon to start to attune to the master plants like tobacco or ayahuasca. And these diets are deep courtships. They're deep communions where we learn about sacred reciprocity, the core tenet really of the indigenous ways. And some people will say, well, I don't see integration being a big piece in the indigenous ways. And of course, living in the jungle, stewarding the land, raising children in a specific way around oral tradition, having rites of passage. Of course, in those native traditions, they're living to a great extent in an integrative container and an integrative path. And so we need to do a little more work up here to ground it in these practical ways. And so the 30-day dietas that we hold really invites people into a deep communion and an initiation into these other realms before we try and integrate this new creative material. Another one is sitting in council. Many people have heard about council. Some have been trained as council facilitators. I've been mentored by Gigi Coyle, who's an absolutely brilliant council facilitating teacher for 40 plus years. And so they work with what is the field that is created when we sit in a group context And a group can be two people or more, just like a dream circle. Or it could be me and a plant ally, just like in a diet. That can have a field of intelligence that emerges. And sitting in council is such a beautiful practice where we don't have an agenda per se. We listen for what we're being asked to offer and what we can offer. And at the same time, we're listening for what we should ask for, what we need. And it's this reciprocal dynamic that we learn to practice. And when one sits in council, I might pass a talking stick, and the permission is there for me to change the form. The next person may not want to talk with the talking stick, may want to work with mudras, or may want to run around the circle and create a dramatic, a dream theater performance of their dreams from last night. Or may want to lie on the ground and create what Gigi Coyle calls a dream star, where we share our own experiences from a journey or a dream, and the collective sharing weaves a more universal archetypes. So sitting in council teaches us to come from leanness, to speak from and listen from a lean place. Different than I'm doing today, because I'm trying to get so much out, but more of a listening, allowing, an understanding of when to step in and where the portals are. So yeah, there's a witnessing that's going on within this field of intelligence that represents a model, in my opinion, for how we can develop conscious community. And the younger generations today are really on it, developing these conscious communities around regenerative practices, around permaculture, around dream share, around initiatory rites of passage. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'd like you to touch actually more on the body, the physical, how we work.
Yeah. You know, I, in my own work, Patricia, have had the pleasure to have worked with a practice called Continuum body movement, which was started by Emily Conrad, a great teacher, and also another teacher of mine called Cass Phelps, who's teaching his own post-continuum version of this deep work that has to do with what they call the fluid resonance of all living things. So by meditating and using sound and breath work, my body enters into a state of open attention where the information and intelligence of the elements, of the spaciousness of my allowing and letting go and surrendering to guidance begins to inform my body in such a way that the automatic processes and the default mode, as Michael Pollan has called it in his wonderful book, How to Change Your Mind, the default mode and the automatic processes really melt away and dissolve. And we enter into this very spacious process where we breathe from and move from an authentic, aligned place with our true nature. And we experience the resonance between our true nature and all of nature, between our human system and all natural systems. It's an amazingly supportive and resilient frequency. So we are actually cultivating our own resiliency, resourcing our own true nature, and building a confidence in our intuitive, imaginal understandings and knowings, and really realizing in that place of open attention that places of contraction, places of wound, places of trauma begin to dissolve. And I might even notice my hands starting to move across my chest, and my mind is not thinking to do that. And I will begin in very subtle ways, even internally, over the course of hours, my body will move and will be literally integrating much of the creative material that came to me through my journey work. And we teach this in a group setting as well. So again, like in medicine circles in the Amazon, it's solo work held by a collective setting. You bring up so much. It reminds me, at one point, my Buddhist teacher gave me a practice where for 1 year, every time somebody handed me a glass of water, or I handed them a glass of water, I was to take a moment in reverence. You might call it prayer or gratitude, or just acknowledgement in the stillness of this act of connecting to that element that nourishes all, that is the lifeblood of all life. And it's the same as they say in certain practices where, every time I put on a garment, or every time I I light a candle, or I will offer a prayer to the collective. Um, Practicing creating states of awareness helps, I think, to sort of nourish these portals of possibility for creative material and intelligence to be grounded in the way you're talking about, Patricia, to be anchored, to be harnessed such that I can journal about it. I can create art and culture from it. I can bring it into my interpersonal relations, sometimes immediately. I can almost practice transparent facilitation with myself, if you will, in kind of a gestalt way, where I can kind of talk to different parts of myself and see which archetypal energies and personalities are spending a little too much time at the head of my council table and might need to step aside and let maybe the feminine archetype or the imaginal archetypes take a little more time as a white male, let's say, and just to really own and understand the POV that I'm always using, the lens that I'm using automatically without awareness.
Because I think practices are really critical to cultivating the structure of us unfolding ourselves. And so one is what the traditional people call the beauty way, and that's meditation, some form of meditation. I'm a big fan of binaural beats.
Yes.
In part because very few people really have the time to learn proper meditation techniques, and binaural beats will help us balance the hemispheres of our brains. So the other thing I like about that is it gets us quiet, but it's also acknowledging the things that we're learning these days with science of, the neurology of it. So
I love
meditation, some time in nature. I make it a goal to begin to try to work for an hour, a consistent hour in nature. And I believe, as I've been taught, that the universe talks to us through nature. And you've mentioned too that the web and the integration, we are a part of nature. And so the more we can cultivate a relationship with it, reminds us that we are connected. And it also is a way of using all the forces to support our change process. The seasons, the ways, what animals might come. And I think, so that's a very big one. I use nature a lot in integration. And gratitude practice. And what gratitude practices do is open our hearts. And then practicing that and putting it in a journal or a gratitude journal helps us rewire our mind and helps us remember that there's actually more working in our life than is not working. And I think all that and all the things you talked about too contribute to us restoring balance. Balance in ourselves and balance in the universe. And it's so prevalent right now in these times of the pandemic. We're both in Northern California, there's fires. And I would ask you your thoughts on what might be the gifts of this time.
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge a couple of teachers in my response. Jeremy Taylor, Jungian projective dream teacher who passed away a couple of years ago. When our current president was elected, he wrote an op-ed the next day saying in his dream, we have now projected a collective nightmare to get our attention, to see that it's also about us, that we are complicit in the other that we so quickly indict, and to look at how we are part of inequality, racism, damage to the planet, consumerism, materialism, participating and perpetuating economic systems that are egregiously unfair, et cetera, et cetera. And so he went on to say that these collective nightmares come only in service to health and wholeness. They always come to bring us to the next stage of individuation, that death, in this sense of that we've been talking about with native traditions, is a reliable archetypal marker of transformation. And so to miss that opportunity would be such a shame. And yet to not acknowledge how unbelievably challenging and difficult it is, and how so many people are suffering from this really challenging wake up opportunity. The idea that we're really in a new state of seeing what's very, very real for us can help us to let go of the stories that we've identified as a coping mechanism, and to see that just like in a relationship, a partnership, a family, a child and a parent, we can bring it to an even more real level of transparency and honesty, and share our hearts, and not come from these highly constructed ideas of how we're supposed to be in the world, and not let our ego sit at that council table for too long. It's useful to solve problems, but it's not useful in the way that Charles Eisenstein has talked about love as a transformational tool to address climate, for instance. How we can begin to collaborate, and how we can begin to look at the power of cultural storytelling, and look at regenerative practices, and look at how certain things like our economy creates scarcity rather than abundance, and how liberating resources, whether it be wealth from those that have an imbalanced amount, or whether it be our own creative energy, liberating it becomes a source of abundance. And abundance is a generative resource where we are called into and guided into where our gifts are wanting to be shared. And that is such a nourishing process that it's an antidote to this fear-based scarcity that I need to get mine, and that it's a zero-sum game. If I don't get mine, they're going to get it. And we start to see that isn't true at all. It's quite the opposite. The interconnectiveness you spoke about, the mycelial network of support and allyship. That's the opportunity I think that we have here, if we can ground our practices, integrate both our shadow fear work and our peak experiences, and not just go to the peak experiences, and not just as white, predominantly European-based Northern Westerners, not just go to transcendence with these experiences, but do the hard work that Sasha and Anna Shulgin so championed of the shadow, and seeing that it's the flip side of the coin of the fully realized whole self. There are a lot of agency for self-healing it can emerge even very quickly in some cases. It's very encouraging, so that there can be some work that's even done at home, with lozenges under the supervision of the practitioner. And that's complemented by deeper work, which is the intermuscular work or the IV work. And these are modalities where we can interact with a client or a patient in a really meaningful way, to be with them right during the experience of the heart opening, during the experience of touching the touchless void, if you will, the intelligence of the universe, as you've spoken to, and as the indigenous so eloquently bring into all their healing work. So I think that ketamine is also a very the opportunity right now also is to make it accessible, so it doesn't become some modality that's only available to elites, and to really create a course correction in the healthcare system, so that this medicine, and there's great people leading important initiatives in that regard right now, just starting out, so that we don't go down the road that we have with SSRIs and with opiates, and some of the extractive models that are legacy industry models. It's not going to be okay. This is not okay. This is not the way we're working. We're working to create an ecosystem of stakeholders and allies. So I think that the ketamine being out ahead as the first legal psychedelic to have widespread adoption, it's going to help pioneer this aligned psychedelic medicine ecosystem.
So I guess maybe the last question would be, what would you say is the most important, what's the most important message you'd like to leave everybody with?
The way we've been talking about interconnectedness, that reciprocal dynamic of the human system and nature's systems, that we are the same, that we are of this consciousness of the universe, not separate from it. I would say that it's obvious at the intellectual level, but to anchor it at the emotional, psychospiritual level, the unfolding of our own individuating process. I would say it's enormously important, not only for our own healing and our own personal growth, but for collective transformation, for the evolution of collective consciousness and collective intelligence, and for the flow back and forth of those processes through the nested systems of us as earthlings in relation to all species that are alive, both here and beyond. So I think the interconnectedness and the non-separateness would be the key thing. How can our integrative process support and nourish the deepening and the embodiment of that truth, that our true nature is not separate from the health and the nature of our planet and our being?